one very useful thing in Visualize is the ability to have things happen within stories by clicking on them. And this is done by adding these little macros into the story text. And what happens is the little macros are special pieces of text that Visualize interprets when it renders the page and causes something else to happen based on what you want. So the way you'd make them typically would be by going into the story panel. So we're going to open up the story panel, the story editor, and I'm just going to make a series of things. Now these are the options that are available. This adds a footnote. This puts an iframe. An iframe is basically a window into another web page within the site. A link is similar except for that you actually click on it and it shows up in the map. Pages are used in booklets. Puts a picture in there. Play can play a portion of the timeline. Show will show an image on the screen. Story will say, I want to go to a different story page based on clicking on that. So kind of like you make your own table of contents. Where is whenever I click on the thing, it will create a move on the screen and move it elsewhere. And Zoomer puts up a zoom box. Okay, let's start putting some macros in. We'll just kind of go down the list. IFrame is probably the most interesting one. So we could put in something like the Washington Post, all right? So HTTP, you always have to have at least the double slashes to let it know it's a web page. So we'll do WashingtonPost.com. And what it does is it basically just put that thing in there. So let's go back to our spreadsheet and enter it in. We'll do it in the first story page, maybe the second, and we'll say, okay, it's going to have an iframe in there, WashingtonPost.com. Let's see what it looks like. Alt-R reloads, and I'm going to move this out of the way. And we go to page 2. Besides the picture that we had in there, we've got the Washington Post, live Washington Post from right now. Okay, we can add other things in. Okay, let's add a link. A link is similar to an iframe, except for it gives us an opportunity to put a clickable link to show it on demand, and it shows up in the middle of the screen. So we're going to say, we're going to click here. Say here is going to be the underlined hyperlink part, and then we'll just grab the same link that we had for the Washington Post, and we'll bring that up. So now what's going to happen is, so here's that, and go back to the spreadsheet and put it here. Okay, now we've got a link. If we click here, what happens is Washington Post shows up here in the middle of the screen. Okay, let's look at some other things. We can add a play to play a portion of the timeline. So here we'll say we're going to do it from here. We'll do this again. We're going to play from 1750 to 1776. Okay, and we'll say, we'll add a little text here. We'll say click here to play the timeline. And I'm going to grab this text and put it back. I'll put a carriage return in between it. Put it here, and let's see what this looks like. Again, we'll move this out of the way. We'll reload it. Now we click here to play the timeline, and there it plays the timeline. Every time we click on it, it's moving the timeline. Right. All right. And most of them work in this way. The where works a little differently. Uh, so in a story, we could say, I really want to go to a different story page. So I'm going to go to story page 1. So I'm going to click here for story page 1. And that's the ID of that page. And I'm also going to do a where. So now let's say I want to go to New York. So I'm going to go, well, it doesn't have to be New York. I'm going to go here, wherever it is. So what I do is I go there first and I click on the where button. And I click here. Okay, so now I'm going to take both of these, and we'll see what happens when we move them. And I don't think we need this anymore, so I'm just get rid of it. Let's go to the text description field. I'm going to paste it in. So now, again, our other ones are still left out. We're playing the timeline. We click here. Now when we click here, it'll go to story 1 and then brought up the first page. Okay, so those are the macros, and there are all kinds of things you can do with that. So